good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are when you receive this podcast. My name is Jabir McKnight, and I'm your host for episode 3 of the Spark Podcast, partnership and how it plays a role in a successful life. I have my guest star host with me today, Jordan Adams, and we have Anthony and Michelle Stepney, two very accomplished professionals not only in their professional life, but also their personal life. I've got to know them over the better part of nearly a decade, and I'm absolutely inspired by everything that they do at home and out in the world. So I think this conversation is extremely important. So we'll be talking about love, life, how that plays a role in your professional success. What are some of the conversations and things that we're dealing with today in relationships that I would say are lacking logical perspective? So we want to bring some logic to conversations that are meant for rage bait. So I'm excited for this conversation. Jordan, I'll let you talk a little bit about what you want to get out of this conversation, and then we'll pass it over to Anthony and Michelle to give a little background on where they're from and some of the work that they do, and then we'll get into the discussion.
Well, I know for me, I'm very excited to hear from a place of wisdom. I think our generation has a lot of conversations about relationships that are absent of experience. We're only in our 20s, so I'm so excited to hear from this lovely couple about the way that they've been able to navigate life and love from a place of wisdom and experience. So, thank you for talking to us this morning.
Outstanding.
Our
Outstanding.
pleasure.
Go
Our
ahead,
pleasure.
Michelle.
You want me to go first? Okay. So, thank you for that great introduction, Jabir, and excited to be with you both for this conversation. I work for a very large, probably one of the largest in the world, entertainment companies. And I work for the consumer products division doing product development and marketing. And it's funny because it's a career we could have a whole nother conversation about that because if someone had told me 30 years ago this is where I would be, I wouldn't have believed them. I actually, by training, I am a journalist and I still claim that. I love creating content just for fun now, mostly on Instagram, but I love storytelling, and that's I think also why it's interesting why I landed at the company where I am now. I was born in a small town on the Jersey Shore, right about 45 minutes outside of New York, called Neptune, New Jersey. But I really never lived there. It was always our home base, but I was a military brat, so I lived all over the world. But I still have a fondness for that place. I've had the opportunity to live in many other cities along the East Coast, so I'm an East Coast girly. If that sums me up, I think.
I love that.
So I am hey, truly, truly, truly appreciative of this opportunity to share this part of my life, our lives together. Because as you mentioned, Jordan, this is critically important. Jabir and I have had this conversation, and we realize that there's a lot of value in us sharing and bringing some of this into some level of clarity. We have raised our niece, for the last 14, 15 years. She's 28, and we have these conversations with her because I think it's important realizing that many of us have grown up in homes or families where we did not see marriage, or marriage over a continuum, marriage over time. And I'm careful not to call it dysfunction, but it's just functioning relationships that don't always benefit others or benefit young people in how we move. I had a great conversation yesterday about how Neil deGrasse Tyson apparently did a piece on how we carry things from generation to generation. And sometimes you may not even have seen it, but it's in you, it's in your DNA, and that's certainly worth a conversation. So a bit about me. I am a um, PGA Master Professional, but not in the sense of, I'm just working in golf. I've been in the golf space for 20 plus years. It was a chosen career. I was at an inflection point. Should I go to law school? I want to go to law school. I wanted to do some things that were unique in the law space. 9/11 happened, and I had got to an inflection point, right? And got to the point where it was the existential question, what next, right? 9/11 was huge for us. And so I decided to stay on assignment. You're going to hear me say that a lot. That's critically important. Stay on assignment and do the things that I was most passionate about. And that was health and well-being, health and wellness, looking at my community and realizing that my community, on average, we die 7 to 9 years sooner than our counterparts in other communities. What is that about? Looking at people that were pastors and caregivers that were some of the most infirm people you ever want to imagine. Well, why is that, right? So I really wanted to get to the heart of it. That led me to golf because realizing that a lot of health and well-being starts with stepping outside of what you do on a day to day and being more holistic in your approach. So I was blessed to get a fellowship with Kellogg, traveled the world, studied that question, that concept, did another fellowship in Salzburg, Austria, and really, really dug deep. Was able to create some policy recommendations that in some way, shape, or form, or in some part, is a part of our Affordable Care Act. Some of those policy recommendations. Wellness was a word back then that was seldom used, but now it's right on the dashboard of most people, right? So it's good to see that stuff come full circle. So I work in various capacities, and everything that I do leans to the betterment of my people. That was just a vow or an assignment that I felt like I needed to take. Whatever I do moving forward, it has got to not just benefit my family, but it has to benefit my greater community. So, in a nutshell, I've got my hand in a few different pies, as they say, and but it's all staying on assignment for the betterment of the greater good.
And I just have one quick question.
Mhm.
How long have you two been married?
Oh boy, coming up on the big 3-0.
And we are coming up on, yeah, next year.
April
Next
29th will
year.
be 30 years of marriage.
Yes.
And
Congratulations.
thank you. We met what, 91-ish?
Yeah. Well, we met before that, but
Well,
that's
yeah.
another story.
Yeah, make sure you ask that question. That's interesting how we actually met. But we met, we were good friends. I think it's a good segue. Like, most importantly, we were friends. And I think
Mhm.
any relationship worth having, there's got to be a friendship at the centerpiece of it, right? Because it's the friendship that keeps you together when you don't necessarily like each other. Um, and if you can eventually laugh at yourselves and lean on that friendship through the
Yeah.
tough times, that's what gets you through, and you always come back to that. And I find that, you know I ask people all the time, well, you're dating this person, are you friends? And then when the question's done, I was like, okay, well, first of all, there's the issue, right? Getting to
Yeah.
know each other just as friends and individuals, right?
Yeah. I mean, we got married in our 20s. So that's why, as Anthony was saying, I think we have a really sweet spot in our hearts for this particular stage of life. So talking to you all, that's why that's so great, because we thought we had it all together. We thought, you know, we're like the power couple. We know what we're doing. We're out of school. We had jobs. We had all the things, but we literally grew up together.
Mhm.
We learned so much in what seemed like a short period of time, because I still can't believe it's been almost 30 years, but it does go by really, really fast. So, um,
Well,
and I
let's
feel that, now more than ever, because you have so much of the world really in the palm of your hands,
Mhm.
that part of our mission is to share what we've been through so others can accelerate their experiences and not maybe have to, endure some of the things that we endured. So, yeah.
Yep.
Jordan, you have a follow-up question or no?
No, you take us where we need to go, Jabir. Go ahead.
Well, first, I think before we go any deeper, I would love for us to start with how you both met. I think that is a great place to start it.
Have you ever seen the movie Love Jones? No, I'm just kidding.
Have we?
We love Johnson.
There was no spoken word involved.
No.
No, but that is one of our favorite movies, so we identify with those characters. But it's funny, we were in a lot of the same rooms together at Lincoln University. I had a high school friend that went there. I went to what I have now dubbed as the most northern HBCU, which is Rutgers University. And I say that because there were just, even though we were at PWI, we had such a cohesive Black community, very, very activist oriented. And it actually, I didn't think about it until much later, how small most HBCUs are in terms of student population. And we probably had literally the amount of kids on our campus who could make up an HBCU. But I say that because we used to visit Howard and Hampton and Lincoln because the circle of friends I was in, we were very into culture. We actually, and now I'm really dating myself, we did a sit-in for apartheid at the Africana House where I lived on campus. So we had an African American cultural house at Douglas College at Rutgers University, and we had a sit-in for months and months. I think I finally told my parents a few years ago. They had no idea. They were paying for classes I wasn't going to, but I survived that. But because that Black experience was so important to us, we used to go to all the HBCU homecomings, again, on the East Coast, so mostly Howard, Hampton, and Lincoln. And so there were just a lot of parties that I went to, and I ended up befriending a group of friends that were Anthony's group of friends, but he and I never really connected. Again, we think we met a few times in passing, but we didn't reconnect until after college. And then I'll let you pick it up.
So, full transparency, Michelle probably would not have liked the version of Anthony that was presented when I was a social cultural attaché at the Lincoln University. I was very sociable and into providing or creating social experimentation among my peer group. So I was the life of the party, if you may. So let's just say Michelle found herself in, some of the parties that I had something to do with, and she probably wouldn't have liked me, and I probably wouldn't have liked her. So it's best we know that God had his hand in it. We can name the day and date when we were in the same room, but for whatever reason, I may have fixed her a libation or two, but we never really connected. It was after college. I was living in Philly. Michelle you were still living in New Jersey. Mm-hmm. And we both got involved. I don't know if you remember this, but we both were involved with the Urban League Young Professionals in Philly. And Michelle was
on the membership committee.
She's on the membership committee, and she was at the table. Yeah, boy, she was sitting at that table. I was like, whoa.
Recruiting.
Who is that? So then some of those mutual friends, she was later moving to my area. I lived over near the Art Museum in Philly. And those same friends, when she was getting her place, they were like, oh, well, you need to meet, Steph. He lives over there, connect. And even then, we were friends, and we used to hang out. And she was invited to some of my social engagements, and I just realized around that time that I needed maybe a little bit more maturity in my social circle in terms of relationship, and Michelle was a good fit. So we were just friends, and we used to hang out, and the rest is history. I moved from Philly back to Baltimore. Michelle had always wanted to move to DC. Her father was there in the area. And one thing led to another. And then, our friendship developed into more. And 5 years later, we were married, right?
That's it.
Like
Yeah.
3, 4 years
Yeah.
later, we were married. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I think for me, what comes up is at the same time, because Michelle, you said you guys were married in your 20s. So y'all are figuring out your post grad at this point, have
Yeah.
bachelor's degree. You're navigating career building. What does this look like? And at the same time, Steph, you're thinking about, I need maturity. And so you guys engage in this courtship. What role did your relationship and dating, figuring that out, play in figuring out life? Was it a conflict? Was it a stress? Was he your voice of reason to figure things out? What did that look like?
Such a great question.
Great question.
Yeah, it's really, really interesting because we were figuring out a lot of stuff. We both actually, I don't know if you mentioned that we both had jobs actually well before we graduated. So like the early part of my senior year, I got an offer. I think you got an offer around the same time.
Mhm.
And so it was an era where there was some hiring happening, not as robust as maybe it was, say, for that generation, the baby boomer generation in the 70s. A lot of them were pioneers in corporate America. There was a little bit of a resurgence, and this is, early 90s. And so a lot of us were getting jobs. It wasn't really that hard. But what we quickly realized is that keeping that job was another thing, and that was not part of the plan for these companies.
Yeah.
They wanted to hire us, get us on board, but retention was not it. And so we found ourselves, so many of us, and that's part of, I mentioned it because that was part of, I think, why we bonded as friends, being in situations where we were working for these large corporations and struggling to keep our jobs, even though we were working at our fullest capacity. We had graduated with many accomplishments. And so it caused us to really very, very quickly need to pivot and look at, okay, what's next? Because this is not it. This is not it. And so what that looked like for me is I actually left this good job, so to speak. And my parents, I think, were like, what in the world is going on? And so I didn't feel that I could talk to my parents the way I wanted to. I had I still do have a good relationship with them. But I think that's one of the things that we were for each other. We could kind of confide in each other about those career woes. And at the same time, like, hey, if I could do what I really want to do, this is what I think I want to do. So it kind of started with that. And so for Anthony, as you probably know, in doing some work with him, being around him, he's just very inspirational and motivational, and will ask the tough questions to help you get to your why and your purpose and all of the things. And he just really challenged me on that and got me to start thinking about, what it was that I really, really wanted to do. And so that's how I ended up becoming a journalist.
So you were my first Dream Beacon client.
I was. And I talked about that he started talking about the 10-year plan and all of these things. And it was so, when I look back, it's just the way God works is just amazing to me, because I ended up moving to Baltimore, even though DC was my true destination. But he was there, and I was like, okay, I think I can live in Baltimore. And I ended up getting a job. So other than journalism, one of my most favorite hobbies is shopping, fashion. I'm a real shoe and handbag girly. Like I have a just to have this fashion thing, and all the women in my family love fashion, and so I used to read, Essence magazine. I used to read even 17 magazine back in the day. All those things, and I thought that maybe I wanted to be a fashion journalist at one point, but I also had this love for politics and issues and all of those things. So I was also kind of reconciling, well, okay, I'm going to do this journalism thing, but what am I going to do? So I ended up working actually in retail briefly along this journey. Then I ended up getting a job at an ad agency, a very small ad agency, because as we worked together on what my goals would be, it was very clear that in order to get to that destination, I needed to have some journalism training. And to do that, I realized I needed to go to grad school. In order to go to grad school, I needed some writing samples. So it was this very interesting, meandering way. I wrote for a short time for the Baltimore Times, which is a small Black-owned community newspaper for Baltimore. And I was so excited. I was like, my first byline. I took a writing course at Johns Hopkins University, and it became each thing that I did, it really drilled down into the Dream Beacon method of having a purpose for those things. And I remember signing up for this course, and the only reason it wasn't that I was signing up to learn how to necessarily be a better writer, because a lot of that is that craft. It happens over time. You just have to practice. But what I knew was I needed recommendations from somebody who was in the writing arena and could vouch for me as a writer. And so that's why I took the course. And that instructor was key to me getting into American University for graduate school. Yeah.
So I think what Michelle is laying out is a level of intentionality, a deep commitment to each other, right? A deep commitment to something that's bigger than us. And I think, as you come upon relationships and the future, one thing that you'll probably agree with this, that we were always on assignment. We always realized that there was something bigger than us. Like, this was purposeful, right? The relationship was purposeful. When I think about how things happen from our spiritual guidance, the church when I first moved back to Baltimore, I was living with my grandparents. It was before I got my own place, and that was probably one of the best 2 years I was living with my grandparents.
Yeah.
That was probably 2 of the best years of my life at that point, because I was able to see them, right? And see them together, and see them from the time they woke up to the time they went to bed, and how they moved. And again, that was one of the greatest blessings I've ever had. Well, there was a church that one of my best friends from middle school, we go as far back as middle school, he was going to New Shiloh Baptist Church. I grew up Methodist, ended up going to New Shiloh. As it turned out, the pastor, he and I hit it off very well. Our music director was just like no other. And come to find out, again, back to what we said earlier, your social circle and social capital. Her best friend was the pastor's niece. So when she came to town to go to church with her friend. She was like, well, I'm going to this church. And she said, I was like, that's the church I go to. And literally, I could walk from my grandparents' house to church. And then another part of it, I was going to another church, which was for men's fellowship on Monday night. So I was doing Monday night men's fellowship. I was doing Wednesday night men's fellowship, going to church on Sunday, but it was needed at the time, because coming out of college, going in the corporate space, leaving that job, it was economic downturn. It was a lot going on around that time, going into the early to mid 90s. I needed that spiritual grounding, and I realized it, right? Because if I was going to continue to go in the direction I was going, it was like that doesn't align with my values. Jabir, you and I have talked about this. Like, I had to be true to what I knew was bigger than me, right? Take my ego out of it, knock it down a few pegs, and basically start over, right? And I think in doing that, it really helped me understand that, oh, my grandparents loved this woman, right? That had a lot to do with it. My mother loved this woman. And when Michelle was coming to Baltimore, I'll never forget. If I said, my grandfather said, "What are you doing this weekend?" "Oh, Michelle's coming down and we're going to go hang out." And, we would go to DC for the weekend or whatever. "Okay, y'all have a good time." My grandfather, from the time he knew Michelle was leaving New Jersey until she pulled up in front of that house, he was sitting in the chair looking out that window. And I would watch, I'm like, okay, I see what's up. And my grandmother would be setting the table, cooking, and I never asked her to do any of that stuff. But what they were doing was sending me the signal that that is the one. And we are going to be complicit in making sure you don't mess this up, player. Right? In their way. But I had to be wise enough to realize that, right? And nobody pushed it or forced it, but it was up to me to realize it. So then back to your question, Jordan, as we moved forward, it was moving forward with intentionality, moving forward with Michelle's career has to be as important for me as it is for her. My career had to be as important to her as it was for me. And then we did this thing that we used to call leapfrogging, right? You leave your job and you go to school, and then I'll go to school when you're done. But we'll always have an income. We'll always have an experience. And I know we'll get to this later, but this notion of, oh, the man's got to do everything or the woman's doing this, and we know the numbers now. One of the things that we talk about, and we can talk about it later certainly, but it's not 50-50. We say it's 100-100. You give 100% of what you have at that time. And if each of you is giving 100% of what you have at that time, you're going to be good in terms of a relationship. Because when I was at the golf academy, I wasn't earning what Michelle was earning. When Michelle was in grad school, she wasn't earning what I was earning. So it was different points in our lives and our careers where one was earning more, but it wasn't a hierarchy. It was, we're working towards a greater purpose. Yeah. We're working towards something bigger than ourselves. Yeah. So that's so critically important. So I hope that answered your question.
No, that was so perfect. I'm holding on to that nugget because there isn't tension when there's intention. Hold on.
Oh. I think she just said a word. I think Jordan just said a word. Write that down.
Oh, I didn't count.
Yeah.
I think a lot of times, even in my experiences, there's tension where it's like, well, I'm focusing on my goal and I can't prioritize this relationship the same way because I'm working towards something. I know both men and women think that way. And what I love for you is, well, there's an intentionality to say her advancement matters to me just as much as mine. And so we're just going to alternate where we're investing. And so when I say there's no tension, when there's intention, we don't have to choose either or. And I don't think I have ever considered that growth can coexist and happen at the same time because your growth is each other's. I just love that. So thank you so much, Steph. That blew my mind.
We're big fans of and. We shy away from or. And I think we've gotten to a place in our communication and our culture that it's Jabir, you mentioned it earlier about music, right? Is this artist greater or that? No, both and multiple things can exist at the same time in order for it to be authentic and real. So Yeah, we
And
did fellowships. I mean, through our
yeah.
careers, we both did different fellowships where it
Mhm.
required us to travel. I remember Michelle did a fellowship here, and we've been in Orlando for 21-ish, 22 years. Came here for my career, but really came here for our sanctity in our lives. We realized had we stayed where we were in Baltimore, we probably wouldn't be together today. So we can get into that also, being intentional about pulling yourself out of something that perpetuates unhealthy behavior. And but you know, we came here prior to that. Michelle, you had a fellowship over in Tampa. So we came down, brought her down here. She was here for what?
3, 4
Three,
months.
four
Yeah.
months. So that was a back and forth. But you know, just different play moving
Yeah.
around and doing different things.
And I know as for women, you kind of mentioned it in our earlier conversation, Jabir, about the journey that women have been on as far as their place in society. We were one of the last to have, well, even especially as Black women, right? The right to vote and all those things. Um, and so it can feel vulnerable sometimes. My mother raised me, God bless the child that has her own. That's definitely a notion. But as Anthony was saying, I think I was fortunate too to see that pattern in my own household as far as working together, a couple working together, and you don't have to sacrifice who you are as an individual in order to do that. So I think that's one of about your profound statement about, intention, no tension with if there's intention. It's really boils down to that for me, that I will still be able to do what I want to do as a woman. I'm not being held back,
Right.
anything like that because we're working together. And, one of the other things we talk about with regard to that is, and I've seen this definitely with our generation, I hear it sometimes now, is that we want it all. There's so much accessible, especially now more than ever, right? We have the world at our feet. As I said, everything's accessible to us. Unlike our, parents, grandparents who didn't have certain rights, who were somewhat boxed in on maybe what they could do societally. We don't have those limitations. So, it's just so much that we want to do. And we can do it and we can have it, but not, I believe, not at the same time.
So I have a
And
question.
why would you want it at the same time? It's like having a plate full of food at Thanksgiving, right? It's
Mm,
like you may eat that one plate and then you think, oh, I want seconds. And you really can't eat it. You can't eat that much food. You just can't. That's why we
Stretch
have
it out.
leftovers.
Stretch it out.
Yeah. So,
so it sounds like you're saying that there's a now and in recent years compared to the past, since we have access to so many different things, there's a different level of discipline that's needed to navigate today's current landscape. You have to, instead of limiters being put on you by someone else back in the day due to restriction to what either success in these different arenas looks like,
mhm.
we're bombarded by lifestyle porn, I guess that's
Yeah.
for lack of a
Yeah.
better word.
Yeah.
Um, we have to put limiters on those things and better understand what navigating a successful partnership actually looks like. And I think for both of you, you both talked about having structuring in your life by similar to why we're having this conversation. You put yourself up close and personal either by choice or by God's grace around people that are actually doing it.
That's
Mhm.
right.
That's right.
So,
I have a question on top of that.
yep.
Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm thinking about Jordan and I had a debrief a few weeks ago, maybe 2 months ago. And we're talking about Bell Hooks's book, All About Love. Great book. And I wrote down a quote that I think is extremely important. I would love to hear your thoughts on it. Everywhere we learn that love is important, and yet we are bombarded by its failure. How
Mm.
does that speak to you? What does
Deep.
that mean to you?
It's almost like you just reached in my head and pulled out what literally where I was. Full disclosure, Michelle and I both were products of decoupled or divorced parents, right? Um, my parents are not technically divorced, but they aren't together, right? Still technically married, but haven't been together for many decades. Michelle's parents were divorced shortly after we met, right?
Yeah,
Around the
right.
time.
Yeah, right after I got out of college, was a shock to the whole family because of how they managed it, whatever issues they were having. As I said, I was sincere when I said I had a great example of what a couple was growing up.
Mm-hmm.
They concealed any issues that they had. And we think to this day it was probably like a midlife situation, going through some midlife changes. And they got divorced. My dad did remarry, so I have a lovely bonus mom, uh, which teaches us other things about relationships to this day. But yeah,
So
that's real.
and so
That's
with
real.
that, we did have both. We're both close to our grandparents.
Hmm.
And our grandparents were married until death did they part, right?
Hmm.
And we also had other relationships that were around us that we could draw from. Um, be it good stuff or not so good stuff, right? I think what we did, what we were very conscious about is we got to a point where we sought therapy, um, and realizing in retrospect, you've got to have a therapist in your circle, like you have a primary care physician, like you have a dentist, and like you have other practitioners on your rotation, like a barber. If you don't go to the doctor, okay, well, you go to the barber, you go to the hairdresser. The same way you go and find a really good hairdresser, a really good barber, you want to have a good therapist and utilize that therapist, not just when things are not so good, but utilizing that therapist on a regular basis to really check in. And as a part of all that, what we were able to do was create very intentionally a marriage mission statement narrative. And I've created this document, and Jabir, this is part of, we really thought about creating the Dream Beacon process in terms of relationships as well, because I think there's a lot of room for that. But what we were able to do is create this marriage mission statement narrative. And it listed what are our core values? What is our central core value? What's our family mission statement? What are our personal habits? We value accountability. How do we move? I mean, I've got 37 different habits that we've agreed upon, that our personal habits that we operate in every day. We don't always hit them perfectly, but we've got them down and we can use them as a blueprint. To answer your question, it's just the same way with careers. Like, you've got to determine what is the destination, right? Because if you start off on this process and you don't have a mutually agreed upon destination, imagine you're riding in the car together, and let's say Michelle is driving and I wanted to go to New York, but Michelle wanted to go to LA. Well, we get in the car together and we're rolling, and we realize within a very short period of time, she's going west. I want to go north, right? And now we've already created some friction. Well, we should have had that conversation before we even got in the car to say, look, I want to go to LA. I want to go to New York. Then we agree upon, okay, well, why are we going to LA? Why are we going to New York? And then we can realize we can do both. We'll just do them at different points in time, and to ultimately accomplish, what we need to accomplish. Let's talk about why we want to do those things, and then let's come up with a plan on what we're going to do in order to accomplish both of those things, so it's not necessarily compromising away from what you believe. All said, it's starting with the end in mind, right? And realizing what is our destination and what are we working towards, and ultimately realize that it's got to be bigger than both of us. And that's the thing I think that's missing in relationships. Understanding that what are your core values? What are you working towards? What's bigger than both of you? And then what is your commitment to that thing? And then how are you going to navigate that? And how do you stay focused?
Question, another follow up. And Jordan, again, I think you'll appreciate this because it's making me think back to, I believe this is chapter one. Communicating those core values or those shared values is like you both are giving love meaning, a shared meaning. Because love can mean so many different things depending on the media that you consume or your worldview or what you grew up around. But coming together to chart out, not assume, but chart out and have a shared understanding of this is what's important to us both. And if you are true to those things, then that's showing that you are loving, not based on just how I feel that day, but what we agreed to. Would you say that is the case? And was there a time before you charted this plan, and how did, things change once you did?
Yeah, I think again, it's that word intentionality. Um, I love to say that I tell people this a lot. My short and quick answer, they'll say, "Oh my goodness, you've been married so long. How did you do that?" And I said, I just had to decide. I had to decide that we're going to keep doing this thing, because when you think about some of the other relationships in your life where the people that you love, like your parents or your siblings, and I think of the notion of living with those folks for the rest of my life, they would get on my nerves. They do get on your nerves, right? You think about maybe when you go home to visit, there's sort of a shelf life. Maybe you can't stay, maybe you can stay a week. And then on that 8th day, it's like, oh, time to go home. Now I'm hearing about I have to clean up the bathroom, whatever it is, right? And I always say that the difference is that we're these other relationships in our lives, for the most part, we know we won't be living with those, our extended family for our whole life. We will love them for a lifetime, but we don't have to be in their space every day. But when you have a partner, that is what you're committing to. So you have to decide every single day, I'm going to do this, because they will get on your nerves. There will be days when it's not so great. You're going to hit bumps in the road and all of those things. So, I think taking the time to do that work and actually put it on paper, or in some type of form that you're going to be able to revisit it, I think is further establishing that intention, which really needs to be there to me. I mean, for it to be successful, because, again, you can wake up tomorrow and just say, I've seen people do it. And there are some extreme circumstances, yes, where people haven't done the self work and you're dealing with people who have other issues, which are toxic to a relationship and sometimes, unsafe. That aside, just normal relationship stuff, you just have to decide. So,
I have a question. As we speak about our examples of love, both as failures and successes, you guys are a prime example of a success. And I am an individual who doesn't have a whole lot of exposure to successful relationships and marriage. So I think as an example of that, and a huge pillar in communities, because we don't have it in ours, what is your advice to people, both men and women, when they are navigating dating? Before we even get to finding the person and becoming intentional with that person, what does it look like when I'm just an individual and I'm just meeting people and I want to figure out, well, who is worth being intentional with? What does that look like? How do I show up and arrive as a good partner or good potential partner? I think that's the question I want to ask.
Jordan, I think half of it you just laid out, right? It's doing the work. I think it's really important that doing the work is, had I not done the work, I would have messed this whole thing up. Actually, let me back up. I messed this thing up right? I think we both contributed to messing this thing up, but we had the wherewithal to say, let's do the work individually,
Mhm.
then we can really work together collectively, right? So if I had any suggestion, it would be do the work. Like we didn't have anybody that taught us to do the work. And thank God I got that fellowship, and that fellowship was very much about introspection. And I think more of us need to be more introspective and look at ourselves. And sometimes, most of the time, you're not going to like what you see, and you've got to have enough courage and wisdom and willingness to deal with what you see, good, bad, or otherwise. I think there's too many people walking around thinking that they are the greatest gift to mankind and they can do no wrong. And then you're afraid to really look at your shortcomings and be willing to work on them, right? Because
Yeah.
we're conditioned to be so defensive. And so I think to answer your question, it's doing the work, being very introspective, doing that consistently, like doing laundry, wash, rinse, repeat, and make sure you fold and put those clothes away too. You know, washing and drying the clothes ain't doing laundry until you actually fold them and put them away where they're supposed to be. It's doing the whole process and doing all of the work in order to create that product. So you'll quickly find in relationships, the second part of your question, I almost think, and maybe it's naive on my part, but I'm just going to put it out there. You'll you'll gravitate towards the people that you will realize have also done the work. Like when you've done the work, you're going to realize other people that have done the work, because of their conversation is going to be different, their cadence is going to be different, they're just going to present differently. When you know you've done the work, you're going to know what to look for. It'll kind
Yeah.
of, it gels, it comes together that way.
Yeah, I was gonna say that. I mean, it's kind of like man, you're gonna manifest it because it's like the law of attraction. What you're giving off, you're gonna ideally attract that same thing. What can also happen though, while you're doing the work,
Mhm.
and I can speak from a female gender perspective, right? Being respectful of all genders. My One of the things that was very, very interesting from the therapy experience was that women often, uh, if you are heterosexual, you're often going to choose a mate, a male mate that has some similar characteristics to your father or parental figure, male parental figure. And that could be good or bad. It can so as part of your work, right, you're going to learn, well, did I make the good choice or the bad choice? Or, it's not demonizing that parental figure, but we all have stuff, right? And no one teaches us how to be parents. That's part 7 of this series. But with that, I just think that's a really interesting piece of it, because when you do that work, then you're also able to better recognize, like, ooh, this is not, I'm going the wrong direction.
Right.
Like, this is not what, while you're in the midst of, that process. So, yeah, I think you said it really well, though, that just getting in touch with,
Thank you.
yeah, you know, that knowing who you are and really just radiating that is I think that's the key. That's really the key.
Two words come to mind when you raise that question, Jordan: love and respect, right? And I think what I'm finding is there's a whole book series on it. I think we have that book, we've utilized that book. And when you think about it, women, well, we all want love, right? But typically, a woman desires love and men desire respect. And when I watch this social media toxic soup out here, I ask myself oftentimes, do these young guys even love women? I'm like you talk about women like they're gum on the street and it's on the bottom of your shoe, and it's like, dude, Start with just respecting and just loving women. Just decide, okay, if you're heterosexual, I love a woman, right? And what does it mean? What does it mean for me to love Michelle, right? And then the respect thing. Young women, like, do you even respect these guys? Like, if you don't respect somebody or you don't love somebody, then we need to start with that. Let's start with some of those foundational building blocks, and then we can go on to the next thing. Other part of what you asked, when you think about how Michelle and I met, we met doing something that we both valued. We were working Urban League Young Professionals, creating that organization in Philly. We went on, we co-chaired and led a new chapter of that same organization in Baltimore. And now you look back, there's organizations like that across the country. We were at the front end of that. Another organization that we started was Public Allies. We were one of the first chapters of Public Allies. Michelle Robinson at the time was one of our cohorts. Now Michelle Obama. And we were doing work that we really, really believed in. So again, it was always bigger than us.
I'm glad you brought that up because I have to say, because it makes us sound like we were these two little perfect
Yeah, right?
civic individuals.
Yeah.
There was a lot of clubbing in between.
Yeah.
I used to love to go to the club. I love to dance, all those things, but I never had expectation that I would meet somebody at the club. That was not part of it. So to add to what you're saying, it was more those other things that I was involved in, and I wasn't involved in them just to meet, men, but, I knew that a lot of positive things could come out of it, both civically and socially. I would meet some nice, like-minded people doing those things. So I just wanted to throw that in there.
Great question, Jordan.
Sounds like we're getting into that idea of a third space. I know people are talking about this all across social media, and I absolutely agree with everything that you said, everything that you both said about being in places that align with your values. If you're not able to communicate directly to someone, right? Because of course, you're courting or you're dating. The best way to at least give yourself a shot is to go to places that you absolutely align with. There has to be some type of shared values to be there. But I think it's something that you all said earlier in the conversation, or no, previous, when we were discussing before recording. It has to be true to yourself, though. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of people that are putting themselves in third spaces that they don't necessarily align with, because the idea of the guy or lady that they're looking for inhabit those spaces, but they're not actually ready to be in those spaces.
They are inauthentic, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's going to keep coming down. That's just one of those core values. Being authentic. You got, being authentic in all things, right? You guys are in your 20s, and one thing I really admire about your generation, real and fake from 100 miles away, right? And one thing I tell my peers is don't come at these young people with no fake stuff, because they're going to see right through you and they're going to call you out on it. Mm-hmm. So I hope that one of the reasons that we all have such a good relationship is because I'm just going to be transparent with you. I'm going to be authentic with you, and I'm going to always just be real. And that has a lot, and it goes both ways. So when we were involved with the Urban League Young Professionals, we were involved with, we worked on campaigns. We did a lot of things together, but we also did things on our own. Mm-hmm. Hey, you're going to find me on the golf course, right? You're going to find Michelle. I'll let you speak for yourself.
At the club.
Right? Michelle's going to do her, I'm going to do us, and we're going to do us together, right? Or I'm going to do me, she's going to do her, and we're going to do us together. Yeah. And whatever we do, we're going to do it authentically. And so your point is very well taken. Do those things that align with your values. Here's something I shared. Jasmine and I were having dinner a few weeks ago, and I shared this with her. I had really forgotten about it. But one of the things we used to do is we used to host dinner parties.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Yeah.
we would just say to 2 or 3 friends, hey, invite 2 or 3 people that single or coupled or whatever. And we would have build your own pizza night or, theme it and have everybody just come over or just bring something to drink. And we would just all get together and connect and build those relationships. And that really, really worked. Some people ended up connecting and getting married, and some, went on or brought in a friend, but it was very authentic, and we just had meaningful dialogue and conversation and all
Yeah.
that.
And do game night, like
Game
you
nights.
play Pictionary
Yeah.
or charades or just things to get people to interact and just hang out and meet our different circles. And it's funny because we would do it, but a lot of other people would do it. I think about my friend who now lives in Texas, and she invited me to one of those parties in DC, as a matter
Sure,
of fact. And
sure.
that's where she met her husband.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just funny the people you're in rooms with. So in that room was the wife of the current press secretary for Biden.
Mm-hmm.
Now that I think about it,
Mm-hmm.
who was a journalist at CNN back in the day. So
Mhm.
anyway,
It just,
it's just,
just being authentic, man. I mean, let's be real. I mean, when you're at the club, you're not being your authentic self, right? We all send representatives of who am I going to dress up as tonight, and how are you really going to have a meaningful relationship in that? I think coming to that third place, and that third place that allows you to take the mask off and just be real and
yeah.
have dialogue, have conversation. That's so powerful. And
Yeah.
so.
I have one more question. Speaking of friends, okay. So I love media, but old stuff, right? So I'm reading old books, old movies, old magazines when you mentioned Essence.
Yeah.
And I would love if, and what I see, my observation in the 90s and 2000s, Black women who were on the rise, so they were professional career Black women, they struggled on screen at least with relationships. Right? Because they're advancing, they couldn't find a good Black man. And so that was what we always saw on TV.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's still equally as prevalent of an issue in today's culture, but I just wanted to ask you, somebody who was there in the 90s and today, if you could compare the landscape of Black relationships then and now, and, are things different? Are what are challenges different? Are pairings the same? That's what I want to talk about.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. It makes me think, I think part of why we saw that portrayed in that era was the definition of success was evolving. If you think about the Cosby Show, right, which was in the 80s, well, I guess it was in the 80s. The aspiration of the Cosby Show was, this Black power couple, a doctor, and she was a lawyer, right? Yeah, and a lawyer, and then you had Living Single that had, these aspirational careers. But what was happening also at the same time as we saw this surgence of pop culture, like hip hop culture going into its next phase. So, the 80s, it was just kind of getting started. And in the 90s, hip hop culture took more of a center stage. You also saw some things changing with legislation, the 3 strikes you're out, and Black men being incarcerated, right, during the drug epidemic that was happening at the time. Our what do they call it now? Opioid crisis, which was not seen as a crisis at that time. It was criminalized.
Rodney King, the video shooting of Rodney King.
Yeah.
Right?
There were all these things happening. So you started to have this thing where there were a lot of college educated Black women found themselves either by some of them actually choosing, and I hate to say it this way, but literally saying, "Oh, I want to be with a thug." You know what I mean? Like that was a
You didn't say that?
I just said it. No. But what I'm saying is that was like a thing. I don't know. I can't pinpoint where exactly that comes from, except maybe there's some sense of survivor's guilt, or I don't know what that is. I don't personally understand that, but I say that in relation to your question because it then to me it became like kind of a um almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy, like, the college educated guys were not good enough for certain people. And maybe that's why we were seeing that. Or was it just the inner conflict of, really not understanding what we want? Uh, because I do feel until that inflection point of the 90s and the 2000s, as you're saying, and we were just a little bit older, right? I noticed it with college students in particular. There was this conflict. Like, yeah, I'm going to college, but I still want to be, part of this pop culture movement, and I want to be relevant, and I want to be part of that. And that for me was a little bit of it. And then back to the legislation issue, kind of what happened to people during women during Vietnam. I mean, there were so many Black men that were killed, sadly, during the Vietnam War. They had limited choices. So I think that whole incarceration aspect of, what was happening at the time probably did somewhat limit some people's, opportunity to really find Black love. Because I see it in particular with my generation. There are a number of women who never married.
Yeah.
And a lot of them, it's because they definitely wanted to marry a Black man. And then even some of them who did marry, it was back to what we were saying about doing the work, because of so many of the things that we have been through. Sadly, their relationships didn't last because they weren't doing the work. So yeah, it's funny. I didn't really take the time to think about that. I'm glad you asked that question. Because in so many ways, it was such a positive time for us in terms of one of the things I'm proud about is just our image as women, how we carried ourselves and, really took our place in being able to do, like I said, where we are today, where you can do anything that you want to do. Our generation definitely embraced that. And work really hard to establish that. But yeah, that is something that still lingers.
Yeah, I think, such a great, powerful question, Jordan. You think about, for lack of a better word, icons, right? And iconography, and how we've got these icons throughout history on television. You go back to the 20s, 30s, 40s, and you could find, I love cinema too. I love writing. I love, movies and music. And when you think about, fortunately, I had my grandparents, Michelle had her grandparents, and we had those examples, real life, tangible, touchable examples. But then if you don't have that, but even to a degree, I was influenced by TV, the Cosby Family. I mean, like, okay, it's possible, right? That it can happen. I know it was on television, but it was in the writing. And so if we're looking at television and movies and videos and music and various cultural icons of family and relationships, it comes down to that value structure. What is it that we value? What is it that we hold near and dear? And what is it that, more importantly, what do we want to perpetuate? Because Michelle laid out, there's generational curses and there's generational consequences, and we all have to live the consequences of our decisions. So if we decide that, okay, yeah, like the video we were talking about earlier, okay, I work in corporate America, but I'm gonna connect with this person that doesn't have the same values and they may have a different lifestyle. Well, how's that going to work in the room when you're up for the promotion and you bring that person into the room and that person cannot function and operate, and more importantly, help to accentuate who you are as a person? I remember times in my career through one of my fellowships. I'll never forget this one. This is going to hit you. You're going to remember this one. So one of my fellowships, we had was it the 50th or the 100th, some big anniversary of this fellowship, right? And think it was the 50th anniversary, and it was at the Supreme Court, because a number of people that work in the justice system at the highest levels were fellows in this organization, and we had it at the Supreme Court. So Michelle and I go, and she gets pulled by one of the most preeminent law figures in the history of this country, pulls her aside and starts having a conversation. And when they came back, this dude was ready to offer her a job, right?
It was surreal.
It was surreal.
I will tell you.
Not a surprise, though. I wasn't surprised.
But I want to clarify, too, because when I made the other comment, I don't mean, because what you said made me think about it. I also don't, it is always about mindset. So it's not even about what the person's profession is. I just want to clarify that.
It's values.
It's about your values, because, there have been, sometimes there's relationships where, literally, if Anthony were a truck driver and he had the same values, that's A-okay with me. I and it really, and that I think is a mindset that we don't often, sometimes we don't adapt, right? Because we think about what that, the video we saw earlier to prep for this, and the woman was talking about, men looking at your resume and all of that. It doesn't necessarily have to be that, it really can just be your values. And there's a lot of, the interesting thing about our grandparents is a lot of very educated people that never went to college. Our grandparents didn't have college education. They educated their children, but they didn't have college education, but were the smartest and most practical and most common sense people I ever knew in my life. And it was funny because they were from two different parts of the country, but they were so much alike, our grandparents. Anyway,
it comes down to value system.
Yeah, it really does.
And what is it that you hold near and dear? What is, what's your assignment?
Yeah.
Right. What path are you on? And I think through that, I think we can really, the 90s, when you think about some of the iconography that you're describing, it was what job, it was car, it was house, it was, the material aspects of it, because that's TV, that's movies, that you need that in order to sell the movie. But when you drill down and strip away all those things, it really comes down to what do you value most. And if you go back and all those movies that you're describing, or books or whatever it is, look at it now with a different lens of value system and value structure, and see if it changes the definition of that film, and you'd be amazed.
And when I think about, talking about the career thing again, we're at this interesting inflection point where there is a lot of attrition in the trades. So you've got electricians and other skilled people who are aging and leaving the workforce, sometimes leaving businesses behind. So I think about the likelihood that a professional, college-educated woman who might be working in a corporate environment, right? That could potentially be a big pool of people that you might meet, might be people who work in trades. And, again, nothing at all wrong with that. It's just about aligning the values piece, as Anthony was saying, with what suits you and your, what you want in life.
Hey, everybody's not going to date a professional athlete.
Yeah.
And everybody's not going to date everybody. Now, what is the big thing? I want to be an influencer, and I want to do, okay, good luck. I wish you the best. Now let's drill down and look at what the numbers are. And is it possible? Yeah, it's possible. What is it? Probable? Probably less so. So looking at, what the everyday common man, that's working within any segment that either of you are working in, how do you relate? How do you connect? How do you strip away all of the icons that we gravitate towards and strip it down to what do you value, and operate in that value structure, and meet each other there and talk through those things. And I think that's the sweet spot of the relationships.
No,
You can
I
jump in and add
agree.
some stats to this
Mhm.
conversation because I was reading a book, and I know I sent you a few of the graphs that of Boys and Men by Richard Reeves. Really good book. And I want to add some context to some of the things that you said, Michelle. Um, One of the stats that Richard quoted in his book, for every black male today, currently of 20 since 20 as of 2021, whether it's a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, or a professional degree, for every black male that graduates, two black women obtain those degrees.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So there's that piece. We're talking about influencers and
Hmm.
athletes, but also to your point, when we're talking about education, attainment, and what that gets you in the world, we're already at a deficit for so many different reasons. Whether
Sure.
that's, like you said, mass incarceration,
Mm-hmm.
whether that is really lack of motivation, or seeing the intrinsic value in getting an education. So there's that. But to your point, also reading a book, Personal MBA, almost over 50% of our country's GDP comes from those, we'll call them small market businesses, those
Sure.
local
Mm-hmm.
businesses.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
If you're an electrician, you don't have to just be an electrician that works for someone else. You can do that for a few years and you can own a business.
That's
Right.
right. Mm-hmm.
Plumbers, these are things that will never go out of style. But to your point, we have to open up our aperture to understand, as men, one, what do we want out of life? What do we value? We have to do the work, and we have to hold our brothers accountable to what they want out of life
Mm-hmm.
so they can be valuable candidates for all of these black women that are making strides in the world. And we also have to challenge, please, whomever is listening to this, don't roast me. But we also have to challenge our black women that are attaining at a certain level not to replicate the past transgressions that men have had when they were in positions of power in terms of breadwinners.
Please don't
I'm
apologize for
taking care of
that.
everything.
Right.
These are all of the conversations that 20 years ago were occurring the
Yeah.
other way, and no one liked it. So why are we doing the same thing?
Yeah. Please don't
Yeah.
apologize for that. I think that's,
But see,
again, value. Right. Go ahead, Jordan. Go
Go
ahead.
ahead.
I think, and I want to combine it all. I think because society has taught men are providers, that women of all generations arrive at relationships with this idea of, well, you have to provide. That looks different. They can't provide in the same way and because we're at a place where we can provide for ourselves, let's rely on values then, right? Not necessarily the gender role or an expectation.
Well, what's providing? Providing what?
That there you go, right?
Yeah. And yeah, it's funny. What I immediately went to the thought of, like, tithing to the church, right? There's the monetary tithe, but then there's also giving of your time and talent, right? So relationships to me are the same way. We talked about, we didn't really get into it, but this notion of being 50-50,
Right.
or, the old school notion of the male just having to be the breadwinner and bringing the money home to the wife. One of the biblical stories I love the most is about a virtuous woman, right? She can do it all. I mean, she can make the money, she can bring home the bacon and cook it and do all the things. But that doesn't mean, if you're in a healthy relationship, that doesn't mean you're less than, or that you are somehow limiting your self-worth because you're doing those things. You're doing it because you can, and you want to, you're doing it willingly, hopefully,
So, again, thank you for raising that, Jabir, and please don't apologize, because I think it's the elephant in the room that needs to be discussed. Michelle has heard me say it. and I'll stand on it. I'm not going to shy away from it. I would caution anyone, goes back to values, right? I would caution anyone to think long and hard. I would encourage people to think long and hard about your success journey and rising to a place that you aspire to be.
Mhm.
And either on that journey or upon arrival, taking on all of the negative, stereotypical characteristics of those who came before you,
Mhm.
all for the sake of attaining that thing or that place or that title, right? Why take on the face of the oppressor? Why take on the characteristics and the negative, all the negative of those before you? I see it in music. I see it in entertainment. I see it in business. I see it in a number of different places. Why perpetuate the toxic energy and the toxic outgrowth of the very same thing and the very same people and culture that came before you, right? Your responsibility and your job is to change it. So why perpetuate it in order to get there? And that's again, that's your values. Like, what do you value? So it's taking that on and fully understanding that and keep being responsible. I think oftentimes we abdicate our responsibility in these various roles and in attainment of status and success when you just gotta say, look, man, it goes back to, I'm just really big on antiquity, right? I'm big on history. I'm big on genealogy. I'm big on looking back 3, 4, 5, 6 to 8 generations of my family and making sure that at the end of the day, would they be proud of me? If they were here today, would they be proud of me? Right? Would they say, well done? And I've had opportunities, probably countless opportunities to make a whole lot of money in my career, but I chose not to take those routes. Yeah, it would have made my family's life a whole lot better financially, but would it really? Right? And what would I have to give up in order to attain or accept those opportunities? I always lean to my values and my what is most important to me. And doing this right here today, that's probably top 3 in my value system because this is priceless.
I love it. So we have so many big takeaways and nuggets, Jabir. I hope that you're picking up on that. But I think my thought earlier was difference between now and then, kind of speaking to how we can navigate relationships differently. And I think our podcast conversations, I had a lot of grievances doing this today. I talk so much mess about people having relationship podcasts. So when I got on today, I said, dang it, but mine is different. This one's different because we're not talking about gender roles.
Right.
We're not talking about a checklist to say, well, a man should have this, a woman should have this. We're speaking to this idea of meet people and study and learn their values. And that is our biggest takeaway. I love that.
And
And
do
we,
the work.
that puts the onus on us as individuals to say,
Yeah.
well, first I got to identify mine. And
Right.
that helps you, period. Whether you're looking for a romantic situation or not, that helps you regardless. So I absolutely love what we're walking away with today. Thank you.
Excellent, Jordan. I think one of the key words, that needs to be put out there and really thought about is this shame, right? And really understanding what shame is. Shame is one of those things that has permeated our families, our individual beings, our relationships. Shame is one of those things when you really unpack what shame is, you're going to start seeing like, oh my gosh, like I had no idea. And I'm not going to sit here and define it for anybody. I'm going to encourage everybody again, do the work and unpack what is the definition of shame and how has shame shown up in my life and then therefore how does it show up in my relationships. And when you unpack that, you'll see a lot. Go ahead.
And you make me think about, we saw an interview recently with Ta-Nehisi Coates about his new book, and one of the most profound things he talked about was people who are African descendants of slaves here in this country. There's an inherent shame just built into our very existence. And I never even thought about it like that. But I'm like, wow, that's deep. Just how we even came to be because of all the atrocities that were done to our people. And this notion that, oh, well, if I was back then, it would never happen because, you know, I would have fought, and like people didn't fight. They did fight. You know, that's it's just the resilience is why we're still here, because we were resilient, and we were, here we go, full circle. There were people who were thoughtful in their striving for freedom. They were intentional in how they went about it, because at the end of the day, their why was, I just want to survive. I want my next generation to survive. And now that we're in a more highly evolved space where we have some basic freedoms, we can now take that to other places. We can take that intentionality to other places.
I love that. I love that. I think we kind of came full circle in this conversation. To end us out, do we have any parting thoughts? I do have one closing question, but I think we kind of hit on it. My closing question was, in both of your opinions, what's the most important key to sustaining both love and success in the long run? But what I've heard throughout this conversation is, one, doing the work, two, unmasking and having real conversations with yourself about where you are, and where you want to be, and where's the gap in between that. Making sure that when you're coming to connect with people, whether that's romantically, whether that is in career, whether that is in companionship and friendships, it's 100. We are not making up for the deficits of each other, but we are connecting in a way through shared understanding and shared values. I think those things bridge generations. The conversations that we've had together today, it bridges not just romantic relationships, but also any type of relationships where you're connecting with another party. I also think it's important for us today to have a level of empathy and understanding of our own humanity first, and the humanity of others. There's a lot of desensitization coming on today and age, just due to, again, like, we are flooded by so much content and media where, whether it's traumatic or whether it's like a dopamine effect that's coming from it, it desensitizes how we engage with each other. So the best thing that we can do, at least what I'm hearing here today, is unmask yourself and realize your own humanity. And through that, you'll be able to realize the humanity of the next party. We can come together and create community in whatever form that looks like for you.
I've got some things. I'm gonna let Michelle wrap it up. I'll speak afterwards. But what do you want to add?
No, I think I love that notion of humanity. It's funny because you took me to a place also where I started thinking about, to the point you made too, Jordan, about, we just thought this was going to be about relationships, a relationship podcast, but we're talking about a lot more. And I started thinking about this notion of partnership. And as for us, as we hit almost 30 years, we're now starting to go into a different phase of life and career. This man is probably sick of me talking about the R word, meaning retirement, and planning for that and thinking about it and all of those things. And I have to catch myself sometimes, because sometimes I get really into it and get overwhelmed. But at the end of the day, I think the same notion that you're saying, Jabir, about humanity and thinking about how I continue to operate in that space, even as I feel like I'm, when you're at your career for a long time, it's I'm at a space now where I'm starting to feel that I need to wind down and just do something different. I find myself saying much more often that I'm tired and all of those things. And, uh, holding on to that humanity and focusing on that is critically important. Uh, and it just made me think about how that skill transcends every phase of your life. That really, that's a thread um, that we need to keep in mind at all these stages of life. And if we can just focus on the living a little bit more within that, that is my hope for you all as 20 somethings. I look back, I don't have any regrets, but I think about there were some times when I just worried about things too much or got caught up in the moment too much. And it really does go by very quickly. So now I'm being much more mindful of how much I want to be present and in the moment to enjoy this phase, even though there are still challenges of life. And so that would be another takeaway, I would say, for where you are right now, right? There's probably some days where you're like, oh my gosh, like I finally got the career together and now I don't have anybody to share it with. Like, what's up? Like, when is it? But just focus on having fun in the meantime. That was one of the things I've said to a lot of my friends who, some of them, again, either were married and then now they're single or never married. And they'd always say, oh, well, you're married, so it's easier for you and this thing and that thing. And I say, you know what? We all have our things. All of my decisions are joint decisions, right? Sometimes it's easier to make decisions on your own. But what's important is I always encourage them to just enjoy where you are right now. Just enjoy that. And I need to take my own advice. Just enjoy life because it really does go by quickly. And we don't need to be defined by our relationship. I would say that's another thing I want to impress is that we've been fortunate. I think we came together for a purpose. And I always say this, there's just different things that happen. And I'll say, yep, if I ever doubt it, this is another reason why I know that we were brought together to do these things. But that's not to say that I couldn't have a full life without, having a relationship or this particular relationship. I think, and that's the part of us each doing the work on our own to be the best that we can be and stay on our mission in life. So I want to be encouraging in that way too. That we have some really highly successful friends who are single and they're just doing amazing things in the world too. So there's something to be said for that. And that when that time is right, that person will, they'll present themselves to you.
So I think, a couple things I want to make sure that we speak on because I want nothing more than to give. I say when I leave this earth, I want to make sure I left it all out here and didn't take it with me. But I think realistically, faith, that is A1 start there, right? And because it is our faith that has guided us, our faith has gotten us through the difficult times. Having that higher power in the relationship, and sometimes Michelle has to speak for the higher power. Sometimes I have to speak for the higher power to be that third person or that third entity rather in the relationship. Like, okay, I'm speaking as the higher power right now. Both of y'all shut up, right? And, you go to your corner and let the higher power, that being take over in the relationship. And really, we start our day reading a scripture. We don't start our day reading text messages, emails, and if somebody doesn't do that, we have no problem calling each other out. But it's like it goes back to the value system. What do you value most? And how do you start your day? And I think faith often gets left to the side and it's an afterthought. But if all honesty, we're sitting here today because of our faith. And our faith has always been someplace, high in the order of values and responsibility in our relationship. We know without a doubt it's what's gotten us here. I mentioned shame. So it's unpack that, study it, unpack it, understand how it shows up or manifests in your individual life and then in your life together in relationships. And studying that, you'll realize that some of our preconceived notions about relationship are mired in shame. And we need to really understand that. Navigating differences. I'm somewhat of a minimalist. Michelle is somewhat of a maximalist. And how do we navigate that? Right? How do you allow someone to be who they are and not pass judgment on that, or not feel like you've got to fix them or change them or limit them? Hey, do you, right? Hey, I'm on a first name basis. Our UPS driver comes, man, I offer her something to drink. I offer her whatever she wants because we're on a first name basis because there's a package with Michelle's name on it, right? And we have
Because she's a
fun with it.
fashionista that needs those new shoes, okay?
I got an envelope every year with a bonus for our UPS and FedEx drivers, right?
Yeah.
So just understanding that, and just, that's why I love and appreciate her, right?
Morning person,
Yeah.
not so morning person.
Not so much, right? And respecting that. Back to the core values, very important. But here's something else. I think this is I saved this for last because I think this is very relevant for your generation and where we are in terms of this community that we live in, especially with social media. We do not publicize or publish aspects of our relationship, right? Rarely we'll take pictures and we'll travel and but we don't tell the world what we do and where we go and how we move, right? Because it's not for public consumption. I respect Michelle's privacy. Michelle respects my privacy. If you think about it, like, you wouldn't take some people would, let me correct myself, but chances are you wouldn't take your bank statement and post it on social media, right? You wouldn't take your latest report from your physician, your annual physical, and post it on social media. I put my relationship with Michelle towards the top of my priority list. And so I'm not going to publish aspects of my relationship. I was just reading something the other day, this person is dating that person and this, like, why do y'all care? Like, why is that important? So I would just caution people in doing that. That's always served us well, to keep that part of our lives pretty much separate and private. And just so let's speak as a man. There comes a time in a man's life where he has to choose with whom he is going to associate and how he will associate. I have made a conscious decision to surround myself by other successful men who are successfully in relationships. Spending time with other men that were not in the ideal relationship that I wanted to be in did not serve me well. And so I would probably say nowadays, for both men and women, really do an inventory check on that and think about the people that you're spending time with. Do those people exhibit or live in the relationship that I aspire to be in, right? And if that's a yes, spend more time with them. If that's a no or not so much, spend less time with them. And it's no it's no disrespect to those people, but you really I think you have to surround yourself by the people who are where you want to be, because you're going to begin to see, if you want to be a millionaire, hang around billionaires, right? Because you're going to see that they move differently, right? Very rarely am I going to be out of the house after 8, 9 o'clock at night. I'm not going to the club. I'm not going to hang out. Now, can I? Sure. Michelle's okay with that. But do I even want to? Right? I want to spend time at home, being a husband, being a father, and being a responsible business person. So I think that's where I'll leave it, because I think that's something that's very important, very valuable. Goes back to your value system, hanging around and spending time with people that value what you value most.
Awesome. I think we can cap it there. Thank you so much for your time. This was an awesome discussion, and I'm looking forward to sharing it with the world.